Thanks, Craig.
Okay, thank you very much for your patience, everybody. We're going to go ahead and start this workshop of the Gainesville Regional Utilities Authority. The date is November 15th, time is 4:30. Roll call, please.
Member Carroll,
Here.
Member Lawson,
Here.
Vice Chair Coe,
Here.
Chair Carter.
Here. Okay, we have a quorum. Okay, an adoption of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
Make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and at this time, I want to address public comment. I was going to talk to the board because originally we were saying we weren't going to do public comment. We got quite a bit of feedback, and so I just want to get the board's flavor on that. Seeing how we do have a motion on the floor, I do want the public to be able to talk to that, and then perhaps have an opening moment for the general comment. What's your thoughts? Just consensus, I mean, just, you good with that?
Sure.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. If you'd like to speak to the motion, please step up.
Could you repeat it?
Pardon me?
Could you repeat the motion, please?
Adopt the agenda.
Is this with early public comment?
Pardon me, sir?
Is this with early public comment?
What you're doing right now?
No. Are you going to have on the agenda public comment at the beginning?
I believe the consensus is yes, sir. So
that-
modified the agenda.
So the motion is to adopt a modified agenda?
It would be, yes, sir.
Okay, sir. I really appreciate the modification. Thank you. We can hear.
Debbie Martinez, for clarification, am I to understand that
It
after
doesn't,
you,
we can't hear it all.
where's the microphone? I'm
Here.
sorry.
Turn
Sorry
it
about
on.
that.
Turn it
I didn't know where it was. I apologize.
I
Debbie
thought we
Mar-
had a microphone up there too.
Um,
We're working on
Not,
stuff.
not a
That's
problem.
no problem.
Sometimes I'm the one that's not
No
speaking
problems.
into it. Debbie Martinez, for clarification, to understand, after you vote to adopt the agenda, right after that, you're going to allow for general public comment.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. Anybody else to the motion on the floor?
Good evening, Joe Beatty. The motion is to adopt the agenda as it was published.
Modified, as modified with citizen comment right after this.
Okay. I would ask that you not adopt this agenda. I would refer to the comments that I made at the last meeting. This seems like the same thing. What I thought was going to happen at this workshop, it sounded at your last meeting, you started to have discussion, and so we're going to have discussion at the workshop. This looks like an agenda that's once again being driven about the, I'm not going to say unimportant things. It's like the tail wagging the dog. You have a foundation. You have not really created the foundational documents. You didn't go through, when you adopted the business code, you really didn't go through that. As I realized afterwards that I think most of you gentlemen are used to operating in the boardroom, and the rules in public are very different. And I think you really need to, you don't have your foundational rules. There are things that are in the business code that you adopted, which I'm not even sure how many of you studied it, know what it was in there. There was no open comment about it. I think you really need to go back to basics. You're going, I see this going the same way as the city commission has gone for 15 years that I've been observing them. And it's time for you guys to take the bull by the horns and to take the leadership role. We don't need to have a lot of this time burned up with other things. I think that the list of things that are on here, those come later. You don't have your policies and your procedures. And thank you. I've got a letter that I'll pass out to each of you.
Thank you, ma'am.
But please don't adopt it and just have a conversation and get down to basics. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, board members, staff. My name is Tamara Robbins. I was not in attendance at your last meeting, but I did watch it. And I too am very concerned that at that meeting, you adopted by a vote your GRU. I mean, this looks like a GRU cover sheet for some promo or something. Down here, it's the utility authority, but this is what you guys adopted. And there's no provision in here, Mr. Chair, for a workshop. And you just like off the cuff announced that you're gonna have a workshop. Well, this document does not provide for the structure of a workshop. So that's why when you said originally, there's not gonna be any public comment, you don't have the power to do that, right? This document has a provision for meetings, not workshops, not special meetings, not emergency meetings, meetings. This is a meeting, okay? And all of the meetings are to have general public comment, and each item on the agenda is supposed to allow for public comment. It doesn't say if a motion's made. It doesn't say anything for Florida statute. It just says that public comment is to be accepted and allowed and opened up to at each agenda item. So you guys do. You need to put this back on your agenda, and you need to go through it page by page, and you need to set the structure of how you want to conduct independent business in your position now as an authority. Okay? Set your own rules of how you're gonna run your meetings. Who can call a meeting, right? Can two members call a meeting? What about one-way communication of the structure to do that? This is so vague, and for you to just now start taking unilateral power over directing this board is inappropriate, and it's out of order. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else on the motion on the floor? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Ayes have it. Thank you. Okay, we will have 3-minute general comment.
Esteemed board members, Jim Ponish, I have prepared a packet for you. I've written a letter asking you to reconsider filing the bond validation proceeding in light of a letter that Hutch has published that shows that his plan is to prevent the orderly refinancing of GRU debt so that the authority fails. And you've been snookered into a bad decision by a conflicted city attorney. Scott Walker, if you retain him, will represent you. You need to get rid of the city attorney before he's disbarred. I have a rescue plan for low-income GRU electric ratepayers that live in the city. I have a rescue plan for GRU electric ratepayers outside the cities. I presented you with a detailed collection of our onerous GRU electric rates, all classes. I show you GRU's official rate sheet and all the fine print. Even the gentleman from the hospital would find it predatory, what they do. It would offend even him. And I've been billed by his hospital. I know how they bill. We have a sheet about GRU pyramiding, showing how they pyramid the taxes and the surcharges. GRU projects that debt service will be 24.35% of expenses next year and will not peak out until 2028. And there's swaps, and it's a house of cards, and if the ratings go down, they go under. They don't pay for their fuel. They have been running negative fuel levelization balances, and I document that. I ask you to not submit to the rope-a-dope, to do what you need to do to root out the people affiliated with the disaster you are inheriting, to respect the people that brought forth this legislation, like Keith Perry, like Chuck Clemens. DeSantis doesn't have much to do with it. although they're going to try to make you fail to make him look bad. And they have no problems with wasting money until no one will loan money to GRU if you don't stop them. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm just not exaggerating. It's pure folly to have GRU ratepayers pay for litigation to uphold the firmly established validity. Judge Dempsey's opinion was not appealed. It is the law of the case. The city attorney would never say this to you, and he's billing you onerous fees for conflicted, unhelpful representation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker, please.
Debbie Martinez, and I'll be succinct as always. I just want to remind this board that it was Democrats for over 15 years that tried to reason with the city commission and certain members of GRU on the gross mismanagement of our utility. We had no choice but to go to Tallahassee for help. We're not right-wing radicals. We were progressive Democrats. I sent you all an email today, and I want to explain what I meant by what I sent to you. As a resident of this city since childhood and a longtime voter, I have been coming to city and GRU meetings for nearly 3 decades, and I do not support workshops, and I will explain why. Private interest brokers, city and GRU staffers, and others who have been working to continue and who continue to work to shut down this board would like nothing more than workshops that do not allow for public comment. Private power brokers also would like a naive board, which I don't think the majority of you are, whose members will show their hands at a workshop meeting in which they are not allowed to take any action. By analogy, as a former downtown business owner and a retired surgical registered nurse, what we have here is a once viable public utility. It was a once viable public utility. Like an injured patient on an operating room table hemorrhaging from a financially ruptured aortic aneurysm, this patient needs emergency treatment. I ask this board, until the patient is out of danger, to convene in regular board members at least twice a month and take action on the spot when need be. Thank you for your kind consideration, and thank you for being willing to work hard to save GRU.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Next speaker, please.
Good evening again, Joe Beatty. I had a letter that I had hoped to get to you gentlemen before the meeting, but unfortunately some things actually caused by the city have taken my time the last several days, and I didn't have time. I will give you a copy, but I'm going to read it. Dear Messrs. Clark, Coates, Caro, and Lawson, as a concerned citizen who for 15 years has been intimately involved in the processes of our city government, it is with all due respect and appreciation that I thank you for offering your expertise and time from your busy schedules for the benefit of GRU customers, and that I offer my observations to the GRU authority that I offered them at the last meeting and now. I hope you gentlemen will listen carefully and carefully consider the advice, suggestions, and requests offered to you by other longtime observers and well-informed citizens such as myself who have been operating in this arena for many years. My observations of the authority board based on the 2 previous meetings are that you are used to operating in the boardroom and not in public. The rules and operating procedures in each of these realms are very different. As the GRU authority, the task before you is great. It is very important that the authority take the lead and set the agenda and work plan going forward. As others and I told you at the last meeting, it's up to you all and by vote of a majority vote, to direct your employees. The GRU, GM, CEO is you, the board, not the GM, CEO, are tasked with running GRU. He is to carry out your direction. As one who focuses foremost on process, policy, and procedure, I am distressed at how the Code of Business Conduct Manual was passed without discussion. As stated in today's agenda, the manual is to provide Gainesville Regional Utilities Authority members background and guidance on how the authority and individual members shall operate. It deserved a public airing and discussion. This is the foundation for operating the authority. You are not on solid footing and are without a strong foundation for the work you are tasked. If you continue on the path you have been traveling for 2 meetings, I fear you are doomed to failure and will operate no better or transparently than the City Commission from whom the operations of GRU has been taken. I'll stop there. May I approach and give them copies?
Yes, ma'am. Over there. Clerk. Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, everyone. I am Ernesto Martinez, and I hate to be repetitious, but I'm going to repeat what I told y'all last time. And with all due respect and in total admiration of the city attorney, Mr. Nee, and the general manager, Mr. Cunningham, for these 2 men to be part of this board is very non-productive. It serves no purpose at all as far as the board being able to take action. Either one of these 2 men can hamper and damp any effort that you bring forth in trying to do what the governor has asked y'all to do. I am not an attorney, and I don't aspire to be one, but last time I said these 2 men were opposing counsel. They're not. They're doing their job, and they're doing it well. But you, as a board, should do your job and do it well and make the requisitions that you need. And this is not going to be easy. It's not going to be pleasant. Certainly not going to be a picnic, but it has to be done. You cannot do it here tonight. The only action you can take tonight is to vacate the building and in case of a fire or a bomb threat. Otherwise, you can't order nothing. You can have some wonderful conversation. You can talk till the cows come home, but that's not going to produce anything. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you, sir. We have another speaker. Seeing none at this time, we're going to bring it back to the board. General Manager.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. So at the direction of the authority from the last meeting, what we were attempting to do tonight is to give you all an opportunity to discuss items as a board. So as we've talked about before, and as you're well aware, we're under the sunshine. And so you all cannot have conversations outside of a public meeting. And so what we are attempted to do is take the priorities that the board established at the last meeting. We as staff are going to try to just give short presentations on each of those. The purpose is not to go into depth from staff. We want to give short presentations, like a couple of minutes, and then give the board time to ask questions, to discuss among yourselves, and then also try to provide direction back to staff if there are certain things you want to see in future meetings, if you want them at the very next meeting, how high of a priority those items are, and scope of what you're looking for. And so the attempt is to go through each of those. What I'm recommending, and as I work at the pleasure of the board so we can do something different, what I'm recommending is we spend about 20 minutes on each of those. And we'll kind of keep a clock if we want to do it that way, just to kind of keep us rolling. At the end of that process, what we're going to attempt to do is take a 15-minute break, try to synthesize what we've heard, and then bring that back to the board for discussion of, hey, this is what we've heard, this is the direction we're going in. So that's kind of the overall picture. The other thing that I try to provide in front of you, it is not in the backup, but I provided it in front of you and to the public, is something I'll go over in a minute as we start the presentation, but it really is what the work plan that we are on for the year. So, board came in beginning of the fiscal year. We have a work plan. We have a direction we're going in. I put together that so you could see that work plan. And then really what we're trying to identify is how do these topics fit into that work plan and where do we want to fit them in? And so this was supposed to be the outcome of the meeting. It was going to take the information from the meeting and put it in that work plan. But what I try to do is provide it at the beginning so you have something to look at. And I'll go over it in a second when we get to the next item. So that's the overview, is go over these topics. We're at a very high level from staff so that you all have the chance to talk and go through them. If we want to do something different, that's at your pleasure, and we can go in a different direction. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I was going to give it back to you. I think you had a few words to say, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, I do, and please bear with me here for a little bit. One, when the CEO talks about what he's brought forth, that is in communication with me. As the chair, part of my job is to set up this agenda. So we've sat down, we've met, he's discussed things, we've tweaked it back and forth. So it's not just coming from him and his staff. It's actually in collaboration with me. And that is one of my duties as the board chair. Obviously, as we're in a regular meeting, as the agenda is formed, if someone else wants to add something, I suggest, one at a time, motion, and then we can adapt it and bring it into that meeting. Like the city attorney pointed out last time, something very substantive and life-changing, we probably want to give plenty of notice so the citizens can have some input. We don't want any surprises. I don't think it's fair to the citizens. So that being said, I just want to let you know the meetings are set up with the CEO and myself at that point. Also, I have something here sort of out of our workbooks and everything on how we should act and how we should conduct ourselves during meetings. And I did want to hand it out, if you don't mind, and please give the attorney a copy of that, just so he's not looking at me like, what are you doing here, chief? There you go.
Thank you.
One of the things I did want to read out loud, and did you get one, Robert?
I did not. Oh, I do.
Yeah, I thought so. Okay. One of the things that we have to be mindful of as we're having discussions and we're talking, obviously when we're stating facts, let's make sure that we, check with our CFO, make sure our numbers are right and everything, because the bonding agencies are watching us. And also we could actually say something that could get us in trouble individually, not defendable by any of our attorneys. We have to hire our own. So we have to really be careful what we say if we influence the market. And I'm looking for that nod. The reason I'm saying that is because I met with the attorneys and they explained this to me. And it was so important that they wanted me just to say it out loud and then hand out this piece of paper. So if anybody's got any questions, I would suggest you talk to our attorneys. I would suggest you talk to our CEO and our CFO. She lives this world and she's pretty fluent in it. So I would recommend that. So that's that part.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
when you say our attorneys, are we talking city attorneys or Scott Walker?
City attorneys.
Gotcha.
Scott Walker's just, and I'm going to bring that up in a second. That would be our city attorneys.
Thank you.
Okay, that's the opening statement. Citizen input we handled. Scott Walker, he was here at the last meeting. I did call his firm, like I said, last meeting, and I told him I felt that the utility needs to look at some representation. I've had a discussion with the city attorney. I think we're going to agree to disagree on that. As a business person, I think I want to be able to huddle up with my attorneys and say, this is what I'm thinking about without anybody else knowing at this point. And I think it's a good move. I think it's a business move. The governor put us in here to run this like a business. We have a CEO. We have to figure out how to run this as a business. And I believe, in my opinion, I need legal counsel that's not answering to the city commissioners. That's my opinion. Mr. Walker called me yesterday and said, I have a proposal. What should I do? I said, send it to all the board members. But I also explained anything will have to go through procurement. We'll have to, get a request for proposal, and we'll make sure we're on good standing going forward. We'll do a cost analysis also. We're not going to just throw money out in the wind because we've seen this too many times. So we are trying to learn from this. Okay, then the next thing I'm going to bring up, just so you know, I don't blindside anybody. I don't think it's fun. I've called Mr. Cunningham this morning, and one of the things this board has to discuss is where do we want to go? Do we want to keep going where we're going and try to get the ship moving in the right direction, or do we want, and Eric, I hate to put you on the spot, but I made a comment and you were it. I said if I gave Eric Lawson GRU in 6 months, I'd get back a different machine with a debt reduction plan. And that made me thinking, do we need to get a business person like, not you, but like you to come in and take this organization to a different mindset? So that's a conversation I think this board needs to have. And I told Tony, you know, if he's our guy, I want all of us behind Tony and fighting for Tony. But we also have to give him some tools. We want our debt to be X. We'd like to achieve it in such and such time. What is our plan to get there? So that conversation needs to happen. If it not tonight, it has to happen though. And I think that might have been where Mr. Coates was going last meeting. I don't know. I didn't know he wanted to have a discussion. But that's something I think we need to put on the table, quite frankly, because if this isn't the direction we want to go, the sooner we make a change, the better. If this is the direction we want to go, I would like this board to get behind and fly that flag and run with them side by side, and let's get this job done. So that's the end of my remarks. The only reason I'm doing a workshop tonight, and I'm not trying to deviate or be disrespectful, as Mr. Cunningham explained, we cannot and we do not. I know there's a lot of politicians and appointed people out there will talk all day long. I don't participate in it, and I don't believe any of these gentlemen will ever participate in it. This is the only time we get to sit there and go, what are you thinking? What do you really, I mean, is this, you know, what you are a smart man, what ideas you have. This gentleman over here, I would love to give him the keys of the kingdom. He does this every day. I would love to hear his thoughts. He might say, you know, if you tweak this and do this, but we can't do that in private. And it's unfortunate, you know? So this is the workshop. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. Nobody up here is. And if we go to twice a month meetings, that's great. I'm fine with that, but that's a board decision. So there's the end of my chair remarks, and I apologize it took so long, but I wanted to get it out there. So if any members have any questions for me, now's the time. Scott Walker's out there. If you want to ask him a question, you're more than welcome to, but you can also call him privately too. You don't have to do it in the public. So seeing nothing?
Mr. Chair, the next item is business discussion items with item 2023-1131, GRU Authority Priority Setting and Work Plan Development.
All right, so as we kind of said earlier, we spent last 2 months, you all have spent an extensive amount of time reading financials, reading overall reports, looking at our budget documents, taking tours of our facilities, meeting our staff, reviewing our operations. And with that said, the purpose of that is to really bring the board members up to speed on the utility and where we're headed so that we can get into a process of a business transformation. I think one of the primary sentiments that is consistent across board members and consistent with what really I think the intent of the bill was and the new law that's in place is to run GRU more like a business. And so with that being said, what I wanted to do was kind of talk through at a high level. It's a document I put in front of you. Again, the intent was to do this at the end of the meeting as a summary, but I'm going to start with it and we're going to come back to it at the end. What this really is a work plan for the year. And I think what we're really looking for from the board is this the work plan we want to continue on, or do we want to accelerate something or change the items that we're focused on? And so just to kind of go quickly through the document, what you have on the left are dates. Some of those dates are the dates of our regular meetings, December 6th, January 3rd, which is the first Wednesday of every month. Some of the other dates are the 2 weeks in between dates. And as we've met with the board, and particularly at the previous meeting, it became apparent, and I think there was a lot of feedback, that we need to have, we probably need to have more meetings so that we can get to actions and get things taken care of. And so what we've done here is sort of put in the different topics to get us there. So on the left, is the budget calendar that we adopted at the previous meeting. It's more the standard outline of how we walk through all of our budget materials, bringing the board along up to speed of where we are, and then ultimately ending with, here's the direction for fiscal year '25. In the middle are priority topics that I think have, that are ones that staff is recommending as priority topics, that I think some of the board members have brought up and want to bring forward to discuss. And so, and then what I have on the right is what kind of meeting, and I know we've had some discussion tonight about workshops and different meetings, but what kind, the format of the meeting is, and then ultimately demonstrating in the last column that there's a lot of action to take as a board to move these things forward. And so I'm gonna walk real quickly through these to frame, the path. Again, this is the path we're on, and what we're here tonight after describing this path is to get direction from the board, have that discussion if we change that. So one, we talked about liquidity facilities at the previous meeting. That is something we are going to come back on December 6th, and we do need action from the board on that item. There's been a lot of discussion about the general fund transfer or the government services contribution. And so what I have on here is on the 6th, having that much more in-depth detailed discussion. We do have a net debt reduction plan that we put in place last year to more aggressively pay down our debt. So it's a discussion of that plan, and are there things in there to tweak or modify or change in that plan? And then lastly, rating agencies. So a lot of what we do, we have a lot of debt that we are managing, and part of that, the rating agencies and how they rate us as a utility has a big impact on costs. And any downgrades would have a significant impact on the organization. And so we are very cognizant of that in decisions we make and how we bring items forward. And so we want to talk in more depth with the board about that. So that would be the regular meeting on December 6th that we're bringing those items forward. One of the things that's become apparent is, we have a mission, vision, and strategic objectives that we're marching to as an organization. Those need to change through a business transformation that we're going through. And so as part of that, we want to bring that forward, what those are now, but also the items that can change and modify and the newer direction that we need to go in. So we as staff, I know there's a lot of discussion about the board and staff. What we are always going to do is take our utility expertise and make recommendations. And then you as the board, you can change those, you can go with those recommendations, you can do it in a different direction, you can tweak and give more direction, but we are always gonna bring forward our recommendation to move forward. So that would be a time that we would do that. Then in January, that's really the first major official budget meeting where we go over our debt in detail with the board. At that time, we would also look at our debt reduction plan. Are there things that we need to modify as we go into the next year? And that would be a discussion of that, as well as getting to a general fund transfer or government services contribution that we're more comfortable with. It's going to be really important to establish what that is. There's been discussion of changing. It's going to be important to establish what that is so that we can build our budget and as well as general government. But if we don't know what that is, we can't really, we don't know on the debt reduction plan or overall budgeting whether that needs to go. And so early in the process, early in the year, we really need that direction. And so again, we would come with recommendations on that. You all have heard a couple of times about integrated resource planning, really important aspect of electric utilities. So in electric utilities, you do an integrated resource plan. You identify your generation for the next 30 years, and it starts to drive, what do you do? Do you retire a unit? Do you build a unit? What kind of unit do you build? Do you get power a different way? It's that process. We're in the middle of that. So in January, we will come to you with, again, describing in detail the type of analysis that we're doing and that we're working through, and some of the preliminary results will be out at that time to sort of what we're seeing in the model. What the model does is identifies the least cost option of moving forward with our power. There's been a lot of discussion over what comes out. What comes out is what's the most economic way to provide power to our community. And so that will come out, and then there's other scenarios and sensitivities that may have different information. And that's a topic we're going to talk briefly about in here, and you guys can have a discussion about tonight. Another thing we've talked about is we have service level agreements and memorandums of understanding and just how we operate with general government and GRU. So we are tied together over many, many years, and there are many touch points. And so we're evaluating what's the best path forward for each of those touch points. Is it to continue in that relationship, to sever it, or to modify it? And what we will be bringing forward is what those are and what recommendations will be moving forward into the future. And some of those would be big decisions, like we would have to build a department, or we have to start an activity that we haven't done prior. And we may have to put an RFP and put it out for someone else to bid on to provide. We will, again, bring forward that. Also, we've talked briefly about GrewCom. So GrewCom is a business that has moved toward expenses outpacing revenues. So obviously you need to address that. So we are going to bring forward some options of the direction we need to go in to address GrewCom. Again, recommendations, looking for direction from the board. So that gets us into February. We've talked about net metering and our rooftop solar. A lot of utilities are moving to some different ways to adjust to that. And as a business, we want to look at what makes sense for our customers and equity in terms of charging our customers. And so that is an item we are prioritizing that we're recommending bringing forward, and we'll bring forward some options there. And then as you see here in March, we made a commitment to, I wrote a memo before the end of the year that with those connections of those SLAs and MOUs, that by the end of March, we would make decisions and let folks know if we're no longer going to utilize a service at general government going into fiscal year 25. So we'll be looking for approval from the board on what those recommendations are and the directions we'll go in March. And then in April, we look at, again, typical budget process, a customer sales and revenue forecast. But also in April, the legislative session this year is moved up. It's starting in early January and ending in March. So there might be some legislative updates that have an impact on what we do and where we go. So we'll bring forward what that looks like for us going forward and you as a board. Finally, in April, the integrated resource plan, big decisions will need to be made on how we're moving forward with the integrated resource plan and what those generation options look like. So those are really big rocks, in the jar. What does generation look like going forward? And then as we go through May, it starts to really accelerate on the budget process. We look at our fuels budget, our different fees that we charge. We look at our O&M and capital budget. What are the things, staffing, capital improvement plan. And then ultimately in June, we'll present a final budget that pulls all of that together to the board and ultimately then links also to potential rates and the final kind of authorization of the general fund transfer government services contribution. And then the last thing the law requires is for us to submit that budget and the GFT GSC rates to the city commission by July 1st. Now, all of that is in addition to regular business. You have a little star at the bottom. So we will have other regular business throughout the year and the thing. This is the more proactive work plan to go through transforming who we are as a utility, transforming into more of a business than we have been previously and getting us in that new direction as a utility. So this is that, what I would view as the methodic process of us going through and doing that. I think today's discussion might be around, well, do we want to accelerate some of those things? Are there some of those things we want to make changes sooner and prioritize them? And we'll go through that as we walk through it. So with that, I tried to go through that very quickly. Any questions or input on that? And again, at the end, we're going to bring this back up with input from you at the end of the meeting with if we've moved things around or reprioritized things or added more items. Members?
I do have a question. This pertains to, you were mentioning the rating agencies, and the last meeting we got to hear from the attorneys potentially to do a bond validation. I was confused on who's going to be paying that bill. And what I mean by that is that this authority is new. We just stepped in. And my understanding is that your former bosses were the city commission, is that correct?
Correct.
So you basically enacted what the city commission asked you to do. Is that fair?
Yeah, they were our authority, correct.
So my question is, with all the attorneys in the room, who is responsible for covering the bond validation fee of potentially upwards of 200 or 1,000 or more, based on the fact that you clearly weren't making the decisions, you were given the decisions by the city commission. We were not there at the point, so is that a city of Gainesville expense that they need to cover?
So, Mr. Chair, I think my initial thought would be that it is a GRU expense. We're looking to validate our ability to issue bonds. And so I do think I think that's appropriate to be a GRU expense. I don't, Claudia, if you have a different perception of that.
And if I may, also, it was actually the legislatures that formed us, not the city. City would just as soon keep GRU, I'm pretty sure. So I think that will be a cost of GRU is what in our meetings that I heard.
Anything different?
Fair question, I think. I'd like to talk to Scott Walker after the meeting about that.
Okay, no problem. Is that all, sir?
One other question. On SLAs, were those service,
Level agreements.
those are areas like, I believe you and I spoke about HR and what are other ones? Legal with the city? What are some of the other ones that were?
Fleet, the clerk's office,
33 of them.
yeah, there are 33 different touch points that we have. It's, we bill some things for the city and they pay us for that. And these are things that we exchange, we develop a cost allocation plan that determines what the cost is of each of those things. And really the question for us is evaluating whether each of those continues to make sense going forward or not. And I think at the end of the day, there's some that are gonna make sense and there's some that are not going to make sense. And so what we wanna do is bring that before the board with our recommendation of what direction is best for GRU with regards to those services.
So with all those 33 touch points, are we making sure that when we're entering in those agreements with the city of Gainesville, that we are making sure that we're protecting the GRU ratepayers, and making sure we're getting every ounce that we need out of it?
Yeah, so I think we do to a certain extent. I think that's accurate. So there might be some that we determine we're not getting that full value out of it. And that might be a relationship that we want to change. And we want to either reduce the level of service or do it ourselves as an independent from them. And so that's the process that I think we want to go through and identify. And in the presentation, I have a few items that I think we need to act on right away. And then others that, as we get into the March time period, like we'll make that determination that we want to go in a different direction.
Thank you. I yield.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any other questions? Okay, continue.
All right, so with the presentation, can someone pull up that presentation? So go to the next slide, please. Well, I'll kind of start talking to the next slide. So the next.
IT in the room. No.
Yeah, they are somewhere. The next slide really is just what's on the agenda. The first item that I put on there was, I've heard from the board, and I totally agree, we need to have a sense of urgency and action. And so what I wanted to share with the board is there are several things that are in motion and that we are pursuing and implementing and putting in place. And so the next slide will show that. And then we're going to go through each of those topics that we talked about before, the government services contribution. And again, staff will give a short presentation and then we'll open the floor up for discussion. So on that first slide, well,
So this is awkward.
so yeah, so I'll start. So I'll start. Again, I think so if you can go 2 more slides. There you go. So I think it's pretty clear in terms of us going through a business transformation, there's things that we want to focus on as a utility and you as a board. And some of those main things are lowering bills, focusing on core service. Are we too big? Are we too broad in what we're looking at? Focus on what we do. Reducing expenses, and then increasing revenues. And so what I want to tell you is a couple of things in each of those areas that are in motion where we're addressing those. And then a lot of the bigger kind of moves associated with each of those areas will go through the process on the work plan that I laid out a little earlier. So lowering bills. We haven't, with the board, haven't had a lot of time to talk about the fuel adjustment, but I think we had at least the high level. Fuel is a pass-through cost. We don't make money or lose money on fuel to generate power. With that being said, it's a game where you're projecting how much fuel is going to be, you're charging for that, and then the actual cost comes in, and we may over-collect or under-collect, and then you make adjustments accordingly. So for the last year and a half, 2 years, really almost, we've had a negative balance in that fund. And so we have now been able to recover that fund. It now has a positive balance. And with that, as it's gone into the positive, we were able to reduce the fuel adjustment on November 1st. And so what that means is the fuel portion of your bill went from 50 mils to 45 mils. What that equates to for a 1,000 kilowatt hour bill is $5. So each mil is about $1. So in November 1st, we were able to lower that by $5. And it's projected to stay there, or maybe even go down more if natural gas prices stay low and continue to stay low. So that is something that has a real impact on folks' bills, and will have that impact through the holidays, which I think was something that came up as very concerned as people get into the holiday season. The second thing is focusing on core services. So you all are very familiar with TRS. The county yesterday had a meeting on TRS, said, look, we have all the items we need. There is an action by the utility authority that we're looking for. We'll be bringing that back to you on December 6th, final sale agreement, and with that request action from the county. So that is something where we're trying to really focus our services on what we do as our core services for the utility. And the trunk radio system was really not in that category. And so we're moving that forward, and that will move towards reducing debt associated with that as well. Another example a lot of folks have asked about, we have the Power District, which is the area around here, kind of going southeast from where we are now. That area is where we used to have several of our operational facilities. They've not been in operation for a number of years, more than a decade. And we are accelerating the sale of that property. Again, we are in a situation we need to pay down our debt. We need to accelerate how we get there. And that is another example of, we have this property, we're not in the real estate business. We want to sell that property and continue to reduce debt. And there are several other smaller kind of systems and ideas like that where we have over time expanded, and we're really trying to bring that back in so that we're focused on core services. Reducing expenses. So Mr. Coach, Member Coach, you mentioned about stuff, SLAs and MOUs. So there are some of those relationships that we recommend right now that we end them because we're not getting any service for that. So an example of that is the City Commission. We pay a portion of the City Commission and what they do. That's not appropriate anymore because they're no longer have a role with the utility. And so we're moving forward with toward addressing that. The clerk's office provides service, and they will continue to provide some service for GRU. But there are items in the clerk's office that we no longer get any service from regarding those. So we are recommending addressing that. Someone brought up the legal fees. So when the board, or when the City Commission filed a lawsuit, they recommended against what I was recommending, to have the utility pay for the first portion of those fees. I'm moving forward that we request to recover those fees. And then eliminating unfunded full-time equivalents. We have some full-time equivalents that we, as part of our debt reduction plan, we moved them to be unfunded. I'm recommending we just eliminate those positions. And those are positions people do not fit. No one's in those roles. But there are roles that we had identified as part of our business that we're taking those 20 positions and just completely eliminating those positions. So that little category right there adds up to several $1 million. And that is something we are in motion, moving toward doing that. And the other thing that's important about these expenses is a lot of times you do this in your personal life, and we do it at work too. You reduce an expense, and then it kind of creeps back in. These are expenses that are going to be permanent reduction in expenses, which is part of the reason for eliminating the unfunded FTEs as part of that commitment to do that. Increasing revenues. So I think all of us look at the utility that there are ways to reduce expenses, but also increase revenues. And so we talked a little bit about net metering, natural gas expansion. There are some areas that we think we can press into and have, be able to grow our revenues in those areas. And so those are things we're moving forward and will be addressing with the board. And then finally, I wanted to touch on the budgeting process and liquidity facilities, just so the board knows on the liquidity facilities, we're coming back very quickly to really take action on that in December. And then on budgeting process, it's crazy when you sit down and think about it, but we just started our fiscal year and we're already starting our budgeting process. It almost lasts the whole year in identifying ways we can reduce expenses, ways that we can improve the efficiency of our business. And so we are really beginning that process already, and we'll be engaging with the board on that. So I wanted to just bring that message of the things that we're doing as staff and doing as the transformation to the board, and really transformation to a more business-like approach to running the utility. So with that, we can go to the next slide and we get started with the topics. And with that being said, one of the things that we're going to do is, as the topic comes up, we're going to put 20 minutes on the timer. Now, it's up to you all if you want to go beyond it. But what this will do will allow us to get through all the topics and get to a break, and then have an hour at the end for the kind of here's what all we heard, so we can summarize it. If you all want to go in a different direction and you want to stick on a couple topics longer, just know that it means we won't get through all the topics. But again, that's up to you all as a board. So we'll use the 20 minutes as a guide for that. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to a couple of different staff. Our CFO, Claudia Raznick, as well as Eric Walters, will be addressing a couple of these topics.
Do you have any questions before I move on what the general manager just covered?
Go ahead.
All right, good evening. Claudia Raznick, CFO for GRU. I have the next couple of sections, and they are very short, so you will have plenty of time to discuss. We've had some discussions internally because some of these topics, all of the topics are pretty dense. And so what you're receiving this evening is essentially, it's a topical overview. And so I feel like you're going to have a lot of questions that will hopefully inform the next discussion, but I can go into as much detail as you would like. So the next section is the Government Services Contribution. It's formerly the GFT, the General Fund Transfer. So I will slip between acronyms because I'm not used to saying Government Services Contribution yet. So, but it's GFT or GSC. It's essentially the same thing. And it is a pool of monies from the municipal utility to fund city services. And so those monies go over to general government. Hello? Thank you, Bernard. You're awesome. Can everybody hear me now? Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Got it.
All right. And so those monies are actually sent to general government every month. So there's an ACH that goes out every month to general government for them to pull those funds in and pay for XYZ. And they pull those monies into their budget process and plan on spending those in whatever fashion that the city manager sees fit. And so the formula for the general fund transfer, the GSC, has changed over the years. So there's a very complicated history behind it. It's always been politically sensitive, right? You're pulling money out of the utility. And there's an extensive history that we can cover so that you kind of understand that particular piece, but I'm not going to cover that this evening. Several years ago, the City Commission moved away from a formula. It became a flat amount. And there were many discussions during that point in time about pulling more out of the utility than the utility earned. I'm sure you've heard the public discourse about that. And so it ended up being a flat amount until the Auditor General came in. So when the Auditor General came into the city of Gainesville, they performed what's called an operational audit. And that audit took several months. It was general government and GRU, but a couple of the findings, the two big findings, 1 and 2, were the amount of debt at GRU, which we were all well aware of course, and the general fund transfer. And so their recommendation on the debt was to deal with the debt, of course, but also to have a formula for the general fund transfer itself. So that was from the Auditor General piece. If you fast forward a year, JLAC, the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, asked for the mayor, the general manager, to come up to Tallahassee to talk about the findings with the state Auditor General, and recommended to the mayor that he deal with the debt piece of it. So after the February meeting, fast forward a couple of months, by April, there was a more formal plan for the general fund transfer, but also the debt. So really brief history, we've been dealing with GRU's debt since 2017 when the biomass plant essentially was purchased. And so for time, we've been performing many transactions, just trying to deal with that monster. But in order to really bring the debt down, you have to have money at the end of the day. And so we performed transactions in 2020, et cetera, in order to generate the savings. But until April, with the drop in the general fund transfer, the GSC, there wasn't that chunk that could really be moved into that program, into the debt reduction program. And so all of these things are linked together and they go back years. And so I'm just kind of giving you a surface level discussion as far as what that means. Next slide, please. Sorry. So this is just a visual representation of the general fund transfer, the GSC itself. And you can see how it's grown over time. The new formula that was put in place in April of 2023 dropped it from 32.3 to 15.3 million. So that's why you see that significant drop. The projections going forward, it's rising slightly with the formula behind it, but it's not getting anywhere near the 30-ish million mark in the next 10 years. Next slide, please. Thank you. And this is the cumulative savings. We ran these calculations back in April. Okay. And so that is it on the general fund transfer. Any questions?
Anybody before I go?
So when you look at general fund transfers from other utilities and other communities, how do we compare?
That's a nuanced response. Because when you look at the general fund transfer, the GSC is a percent of operating revenues, which is typically what you see, particularly in a Fitch review report. I know there's been some discussions about that report itself. It comes out that it's kind of average, it's in the middle. The issue is GRU's debt is outsized. That's where the crux is. So while it is a reasonable percentage of operating revenues, it's not when you have to tag on the debt service. Because GRU's debt service is extremely large. It's 20-ish, 25% of our overall expenses. When you look at the other utilities, it's more reasonable, so much, much lower percentage. And I think people kind of get lost in that because when they're saying it's okay because as a percentage of operating revenue, it's 6-7%, not when you're paying 100+ million in debt. That's the difference. Thank you.
Yeah, Claudia, quick question. Sorry, I'm going to have mine. So during these studies and these findings that we were, I guess, overpaying in the transfer, was that a fair statement?
So there was an analysis that was completed that compared the income of the utility, so profit and loss from 2003, I think, to 2018 when that occurred, and then ran some projections going forward to 2027. And yes, the utility had overpaid when you're looking at strictly P&L.
Okay.
Right. I'd like to tag a little bit if you could. So that occurred up to the point where the commission started increasing the base rates at the utility. And so now the base rates at the utility, those increases have now created an environment where the utility is projected to be able to pay the general fund transfer and have a little bit of profit left over. So that's the base rates that the commission have approved over the past couple of years have changed that dynamic. I don't think this discourse has really caught up to what's occurring now. Now, in the debt reduction plan, those excess revenues are included in the calculation to reduce the debt. So essentially the profit's being pulled out and applied to debt over the next 10 years.
So was there any talk about us recouping any of the overpayments or shifting some of the debt? Because I heard recently the city was pretty proud of their debt ratio and we're sort of upside down. And if we were overpaying, either we go flat for a long period of time, we shift 100 million or so over to the city. I mean, I hate to say it, it's sort of like they built a business and milked it dry and now they're saying, hey, we're looking good over here. Is there any true up? Was there any talk about true up and getting our money back?
So I would say no. And
Okay, well, let's start that conversation.
now, bear in mind, anything having to do with general government, it's like to be very methodical as we're talking through that process. hear what you're saying about the recovery, and when you look at the number, we've calculated the number because you requested it.
Yes.
But I'd like to have more conversations about what that
Or
looks like.
even going flat, I know there's a built-in increase in it, but maybe we go flat for a period of time. At some point, we have to realize that mistakes were made. When I was on the city commission, I admitted to you, I was part of the problem. I did a debt reduction. So we need to recognize that, and let's make sure we're whole at the end of the day is what I'm going for.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions on the general fund transfer, the GSC? Okay,
And I think part of the question here is, do you, as
Try to grab the mic, Tony. I apologize, just so everybody.
as a board, when we bring more information back on this, are there other types of things you want to see? Like Member Lawson asked about comparing to other utilities. Are there other types of information that you want to see as part of the discussion of the general fund transfer, the recoup type of information? So what we're trying to do tonight is capture that type of scoping for a future meeting. So if there's anything else.
I just think we owe it to our ratepayers and our employees to look at all of the options, so when we're out in the public, we can say, we looked at that option, here's why we can't do it, or here's what we're going to do to go forward. So I say, let's put everything we can on the table now.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to bring up that, depending on who you ask, if we were to recommend the cancellation of the general fund transfer, you get multiple answers. And one of them could be, well, we're not being charged franchise fees now, where we could be. The other one is, well, they can't sue you. So I would like for us as the GRU Authority Board to understand legally, if we as a group chose to stop the general fund transfer, what are the repercussions of that, if any? My little view is that I do believe there is importance with city government, don't get me wrong, but everyone depends on power, everyone depends on fresh water, everyone depends on these things, and I think that we're more emergent, if you look on a national level. Without us, chaos happens. So I would suggest that we, sooner than later, discuss with legal counsel, other than Mr. Nee, no disrespect, sir, the repercussions, if any, if we were to recommend canceling the general fund transfer.
Okay, Eric, you had your hand up?
You know, Claudia brought up that the base rate was raised to sort of drive more through the government services transfer.
I would say that the linkage is what happened through the process. So in the discussions with the commission, raising base rates in order to cover costs, also to cover debt service, and also cover the general fund transfer been going on since 2018. So it's been a long period of time.
Rather than a clawback, I wonder if there's a way to sort of adjust that back to normalized rates. And still, we always got to maintain our debt reduction plan. So we can never sort of, can only get better, not worse. But is there a way to think through those relationships?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that when we get to rates, and I happen to notice mine says fiscal year 18, but we're still selling our residential power below our cost. So I'm not sure how much more reduction we can take below zero, and that concerns me. So that's a talk we're going to have.
These are complicated topics, and they're all related. And so I'd like to cover them all in depth, probably sooner rather than later, so you could get more comfortable with those topics. Yeah.
And how they relate to one another particularly.
Any other questions? Okay.
Okay.
Apologies. Next slide.
Never apologize for being accurate.
Okay, so I touched on the net debt reduction plan. It's complicated on the other side. You're seeing just an overview, kind of a topical overview of this plan. So back in, February, when JLAC asked the utility, the city, to come up to Tallahassee and have a discussion, when we came back, one of the pieces were like, how do we actually put this in and have a metric that we can attach to it? So last fall, in October 22, the commission approved an updated debt defeasance policy that had financial metrics attached to it. Prior to that, the commission had never approved financial metrics for the utility. Inside of those metrics was a capitalization rate calculation, and it's pretty complicated. I don't have it on the slides this evening, but it actually takes the debt to capitalization ratio, and it's linked into leverage. So really, it's linked into debt, but it's attached to cash as well. And so right now, we're at 86.99%. So with this plan, it takes us down 315 million to 70%, provided everything stays the same. Everything's linked. The base rates are linked, the expense reductions are linked, the organic principal payments, everything is linked together. So if you pull one, something else has to pop back in. So I liked what you said about making the plan better, so maybe making it more aggressive. So part of this plan comes back to the two findings that I was discussing earlier. So GRU's debt was high, which we already knew, and there was no formal methodology by the city commission for the general fund transfer. So those rolled into the plan, and so they were all linked together. Next slide, please. And so this plan that was developed, and you could argue the points, the percentages, all those sorts of things, but at the end of the day, the goal was to get to the 70% debt to capitalization ratio. And so the excess revenues attached to the base rate increases is in there. The organic principal reductions are in there. But also, what is the payment for the general fund transfer, the GSC, to be to also accommodate that? Because there are different ways of putting the formulas together. So behind the scenes, general government staff worked with GRU staff. The two gentlemen that worked on that have been with the city for, oh my goodness, 4 decades. And so they have a lot of experience with what this has been in the history, and they were trying to meet essentially a goal, right, of getting to this number, the 70%, and then making it reasonable. So that's why you see 70%, then also you can see 90%, 5%, so there's different pieces to it that sometimes don't make sense, but just remember there was an overall goal to get to this 70% at the end of this time frame. So next slide, please. So with this, and I realize I'm giving you like very little information and then saying, can you stay the course? You want us to bring options? Our board gives direction. So that's why one of my recommendations this morning with the general manager is we need to get this on the December schedule as soon as possible so you can get that background. So thank you.
Quick clarification. Anybody else have a question before I go? And again, so I don't know what these other board members know. I know the questions I asked. I don't know the questions any of them asked. I don't know where they're at in this. But are the rest of the board members aware that we're paying interest only on what percentage of our bonds at this point?
The percentage.
Like 70% or something?
I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but we were talking about, let me talk about how GRU has completed their debt financing. It is complicated, but when you go back and you look at the history of GRU's debt, and sometimes you're a little bit of an accounting nerd and you kind of go back and you kind of look at these things, over time, GRU has never applied more in principal than they might have had they not been paying more in the GFT, et cetera. So when you go back and you kind of look at the history, the principal is pretty flat. And so what happens when you're looking at your debt service going over time, you don't want spikes in your debt service, right? You don't want to have 1 year where you have 90 million and the next year you have 110, because now you have huge swings in your reserves, et cetera. So what the utility has done historically is they take the principal and they push it out into those outlying years. So you're paying interest only on many bonds on the front side, some principal depending on how you structure it, but the principal is really on the back side of it. So for this net debt reduction plan to work, it now has to level out. You can't push that out anymore. But remember, in the past, the utility hasn't had the funding to really do this, right? To really drive down the principal payments. So funding helps with that and helps to make different decisions in your debt profile. So I just wanted to give you that background. There are fundamental things that we need to adjust in our debt service, but we need the money to actually do it.
Right, and I just wasn't, again, not knowing what questions they asked. I would love it if we were able to say, here's all the questions asked. Because then this meeting probably wouldn't have been as necessary. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Resnick, you're the CFO here, correct?
Yes.
What would you do?
I would pull principal forward. I would absolutely pull it forward. Typically what we do is we're trying to restructure to deal with interest costs over time, and that's the mechanism we've been able to use in order to save on total debt service costs. I don't like pushing principal out. I do not like that at all. You pay much more in the long run than just flattening it out. But again, we have to have the funding to do that, the commitment from the board to actually do that. then you also have to make different decisions as far as capital programs and those sorts of things. It's a complicated enterprise, but I would definitely pull it forward. Let me talk about debt at a utility, because in your personal life, you don't like debt, right? You want to pay down your mortgage, pay down your credit cards, make sure you don't have it. For a utility, it makes sense to spread the costs over the ratepayers. So these are 30, 50, sometimes 80-year assets that we want to spread those costs over. So it makes sense to have some level of costs that are flowing over time, because otherwise your current year customers are paying for your current year capital, and that doesn't make sense because their children are going to be using it 20 years downstream. So, thank you.
Can you speak to how you came up with the 10-year debt reduction plan? And as I understand it, that was meant to improve our bond ratings. And so what's the expected financial impact on that? So why 10 years? Why not 5? Why not 15? And then what was the projected impact to our bond rating? And then how does that flow through to our customers?
So the 10-year period, we complete 10-year forecasting. So didn't want to push it out too much longer. And it was difficult to pull it up because, again, we need that funding. We're talking about moving our net debt down $315 million. So to do it in 5 years is extreme. So 10 years is where we landed. We can switch it however the board sees fit. As far as the rating agencies are concerned, it's really the leverage at the utility. So as you're bringing down the debt, increasing cash, you are decreasing leverage. One of the agencies in particular, Fitch, they complete a stress test. So essentially they stress the finances of the utility. And we've had some very positive comments from them on the plan because they can see the reduction in the debt. As far as it impacting the customers, it's a slow process as you're bringing down that debt. It's a very large kind of mountain we're trying to pull down. So the rates are the rates right now, which we'll discuss more in depth. So there's not an immediate impact to the customer right now. Did that answer all your questions? Okay, I was trying to keep track of them. You had 3 right in a row. Okay.
Well said, board.
Okay, next slide. Thank you, Christine. This one's really short. It's like one.
So I guess real quick, anything else from the board that you need or that you're looking for to get more information, more details? Our plan is to give the more detailed presentation. But
So while you ask that question, this is a good question with the board. We're not going to take action, but we're just sort of thinking here. I say, I'd love to see the debt reduction plan in detail. Should that be populated to the rest of the board at that time?
So I think let me answer this way and then see. So the plan right now would be to bring that to you in detail as a presentation at the next meeting.
No, I respect that. What I'm saying, if Eric all of a sudden comes up with an idea and goes, well, I really like to see how the fuel's being, and he says, can you send me something on that? Should you, then we would know at least what the other people know without talking. You know what I'm saying? Trying to.
Yeah.
So that's already prepared.
Yeah, we did that at the city commission, by the way.
Yeah, so the
One
information.
class all got.
Oh, I see what you're saying. To the material itself, it's already prepared. So if you ask the question, we can send it directly to the board.
And we can do it to all members.
That's what I'm saying. And there's as long as we don't do two-way communication, and if he asks for something, they can send it to all board members, not identifying him.
This plan was worked at between the utility staff and general government staff and presented and adopted by the city commission. We could probably pull it up in eScribe right now and show that to the board or individually, collectively at a public meeting.
You're missing my point. My point is, if he happens to call the general manager and say, I want to know something, there's no legal reason that they can't send it to all board members they just don't put his name on it.
Yeah, and I think that's preferable. That's the way I would.
They just don't put the name
respond
on
to you, is that if there's a request from one,
They send it to all.
it's fair to treat you all that way.
We
because
did that at the city commission, but we can do that with this board.
I think that's fair to expect.
Okay. Yep. That gets us all on the same page sooner. No, go ahead.
As you present the debt reduction plan, I would be interested to see some different analysis and scenarios. As you talked about earlier, there's some opportunities to reduce cost. And if we accelerated that and built that into your plan, how would that be reflective? And is there a way to improve the debt reduction plan? And then again, how does that sort of eventually flow through to the customer? Just helping me connect all those dots.
Absolutely. Yep, we can do that.
All good? Don't say it's gonna be short again, 'cause that's when we start our questions.
My piece is short. There we go. So the rates discussion, we had a request for historical rates, and in particular, to essentially make the statement that the city commission approved these rates historically. So these are the rates for each of the systems, electric, water, wastewater, and gas. The telecommunications system sets their quote-unquote rates based upon market competitive rates, so it's not completed out of my group. We handle the other four, and so you can see the history of the rates. Now, going forward, it's simple. 25 through 27, it's 3% in the electric system and 5% in wastewater.
Unless this board changes it.
Exactly.
And I do want to point out, I'm part of the problem in 14, 15, and 16.
So that concludes my portion.
I was just gonna add one thing. I believe, Member Coach, you had a question, just to bring clarification. So the rates for fiscal year '24, which is the fiscal year we're in right now, that start October 1st, those were approved in September, which is typically how, when you approve the final readings of the ordinance changes each year. And so those were approved with the city commission in September of this past year.
Thank you.
Next.
Any other thoughts on the rates? So then anything where you want us to bring
Well-
back, I mean, we're gonna have, through the budget, so let me just clarify, through the budget process, this is absolutely gonna be a large discussion. The question really is, do we wanna accelerate that? Do we wanna bring it sooner? Or do you wanna bring specific types of information forward for analysis or options, things of that nature?
So I'll go back to when I was in the city commission, and back then, the first 850 KW was below cost, and I scratched my head, said, why would any entity sell something below cost of manufacturing? And so unfortunately, we're selling all of our residential below cost of manufacturing, and then the fuel is a pass-through that we don't get any profit off. It's a true pass-through. We have an expense to do it, but we're not recouping, is the way I understand it. What would happen if we trued up to zero? Anything we do is gonna impact our customers, but if we're gonna run a business, how are we selling stuff below cost? That's a spooky thought. Because if we true up, what's that gonna do to the customers we're trying to protect now?
Sorry. Yeah, so so the question is, if we're below the cost of service now, if we brought that to the cost of service, that would be increasing the residential rates.
What you sent me is accurate, but even though it says FY18?
So it's FY18 when we had an external study completed.
Okay.
You should also,
Then
we
I'm-
complete them internally every year, and I
Yeah,
ran the analysis.
Then I won't quote these prices, because I can't. But they're substantially below cost of.
We complete cost of services internally every year, so we do have that, and we're going through an external cost of service study now to update that. But I would say the results are gonna be pretty similar.
So if we were to true up our rates, it would be devastating to our ratepayers and the low.
On the residential side,
Yes,
yes.
to the tune of 43% and 40%. So I'm just saying, that was bad business. That was bad business by the city commission. But basically, and so not overcharging, we're 61.8% above cost on commercial rates.
So we're currently going through an external cost of service study now. Those results will come to the board.
Okay, and I'm just wanting to make everybody aware, because I don't know if everybody asked the same question I did, that, when we're talking about rolling back rates, well, we're already in reverse. How far do we want to go down this pipe?
Sounds like it's just shifting from residential to commercial.
Well, the bottom note, commercial customers subsidize residential customers. The intent by the city commission, residential tier split was to promote conservation and efforts.
So if I may, this has been going on for at least a decade and a half.
Oh, yeah. This isn't new. And that's why I said I saw this happening on tier one when I was on the commission, and I scratched my head and I didn't do anything.
Is this cost shift uncommon with common with other utilities?
It depends. It's a little, I would say, more extreme in this case.
And who owns it?
Who owns which?
You don't see Duke and FPNL doing this, do you?
Yeah, they perform cost
they?
of service studies.
Oh, no, I mean, sell power below cost.
I can't speak for them.
Right.
But if I could, I would probably agree that they wouldn't.
Yeah. Okay.
Previous to this board, the city commission was the one who approved rate increases, is that correct?
Yes.
And would you say that the primary purpose of that rate increase was to make up for debt, try to pay off debt? Or what was the vehicle that was utilized to justify rate increases repeatedly over and over and over again by the city commission?
So nuanced response. So the utility, for some years, would ask for base rate increases that would not be approved. And so that creates different decisions inside of the utility, for example. So then you have areas that could be under-resourced, right? They don't have the dollars to do what they need. It's only recently that the commission has been steadily increasing base rates. And when I say steadily, every year, because I apologize, Christine, can you go back to that slide with the base rate increases?
Started in 17.
Right. So it started after the buyout of the PPA for the biomass plant. The cost at the utility the largest cost at the utility, actually there's two, so it's debt service and labor, but it's really the debt service that made the base rates necessary after buying out the biomass PPA, because it's essentially trying to pay down that outsized debt now. So if that makes sense.
Has anyone in the commission ever, previous to us, proposed actually going through expenses and reducing expenses at GRU, such as personnel, et cetera?
Yes, every budget year. Yes. Now, some years are more on the macro side versus the micro side. So when you look at GRU's budget, yeah, obviously there's large components. So you have the debt service, and the debt service is the debt service unless we shift it and to bring in more principal, which means you're paying more in debt service. You have labor dollars, and so labor dollars are another chunk. It's about 25%. And then you have what's called non-labor, and then you have capital. Okay, so if you make the argument that you have to complete the capital projects in order to maintain the facilities, et cetera, because you're generating the revenue, then your capital projects need to stay in place. And yes, they can be moved, reduced, up, down, et cetera. But when you look at the O&M side, the non-labor piece, it's pretty fixed in there. There's very little discretionary non-labor that's sitting out there. And when you say discretionary, I'm talking about things like training, travel, those types of soft type things in there that you can strip out. The largest expense of the utility is labor. So to reduce costs, you're talking people at the end of the day. And at least in my professional opinion, if you're looking to do that, that needs to be extremely methodical, because you're dealing with an infrastructure that has to be maintained by the very people that maintain it. And so you really have to have some thought put into those conversations. I know I gave you a long answer, but it's one of those things we really need to go through the budget.
The IRP, though, sort of contemplates those kinds of things. As you're looking at your infrastructure, our infrastructure, what plants to maintain, what plants, maybe your end of life, that sort of flows into your personnel cost eventually.
I would say probably yes and no. I haven't seen the results of the IRP, so I don't know what they look like just yet. You would think that you might have some labor changes, but there are additional costs in there. So O&M and decommissioning costs, for example. You can't just leave a power plant out there. So it's a pretty complicated process when you're looking at the IRP. But to your point, generation, I mean, it's the electric system is the highest revenue producer, but it's also the highest expense side as well. So.
Yeah, what I was just gonna add is it does that for the electric system. So you're evaluating your future generation, and yes, we are going to evaluate personnel as part of that, and what the path forward is and how we're gonna do that. And so that will be part of it, along with all the other expenses like decommissioning and the capital expense to build a facility. All of those will be contemplated in that.
So I just wanted a part two question for you, Mr. Resnick. So generically, higher labor could equal higher rates? Is that a fair statement?
You could link them, yes,
Okay.
because as labor costs do go up, you do need the revenue stream to pay for labor. When I speak about labor, it's base salaries, it's fringe benefits, health insurance, those types of things. It's all rolled into when you call it labor. It's labor plus benefits.
Mr. Cunningham, do you agree with that?
Yes.
good? Just quick, and I apologize because as you talk, I take notes. What happened when we took the biomass plant from fuel to base? And I love that smile. Did it increase the city's taxes by roughly 2.1 million?
So it,
Because they don't get taxed on fuel, just on base.
right, so for the benefit of the rest of the board, when.
That's why I asked the question. I wasn't, because I want them to hear it.
So the biomass PPA payments were in the fuel adjustment. So prior to my time here at the utility, I used to hear in the community about the fuel adjustment, how it was increasing. And when I started at GRU, I started to kind of understand what that actually meant. And what it meant was as the biomass plant was about to come online, they started moving the fuel adjustment up. So you had that mechanic going on. And so fast forward to 2017, when we actually bought out the PPA, we had the opportunity to actually pull that out of fuel, and it went into base rates. So the debt service piece essentially replaced the fuel cost itself. So when that piece goes into the base rates, it's a different piece of the bill, right? It's not sitting in fuel, but it's a different piece of the bill. And because it went into base rates, it increased the utility taxes that were available to general government. So that first year, it went up somewhere about 2.7 or 2.9 million that went to general government and the utility tax payments. Did that
Yes,
answer your
yes, ma'am. And I was just
Okay.
pointing that out is because, you know, and to Mr. Coates's point, we don't want to, last thing we want to do is hurt general government, but there has been some, because of some of our movements, they have had an increase in taxes. And so it's not all of it takes. Some of the things we're doing are benefiting government, and moving that was 2.7. I had 2.1, so.
So if I may, every base rate increase increases the utility tax payment to
Yep.
general government. So,
So when we decrease the fuel and increase the base, so I just want everybody to hear the questions I've been asking.
any other questions?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Keep going.
I'm done.
It's their fault. They put something in my hand.
Actually, back to me.
Okay.
All right, can we go to the next slide? All right, so, big topic, this summer as the bill became law and then
Yep.
coming into, the board being seated is independent legal counsel. So as you all are well aware, Dan Nee is the city attorney, and the city charter, language establishes him as the attorney for the city, overall, and that includes the utility. So we've received a lot of questions, and we've had a lot of discussion about do we really have independent counsel? Do we really have, is there a conflict of interest? Is there a different way that we should move forward? So in terms of what I'm recommending is that we move forward at looking at like an RFP process or some sort of competitive process for us to identify legal counsel. And then what we also do is potentially seek a legislative solution. So the city charter, if the language of the city charter was potentially changed through the legislative process, for instance, it could create a more independence for the board, and especially from a legal representation standpoint. And so what direction that I'm recommending we go in is doing both of those things, looking at what would a competitive process look like for bringing someone in, but then also looking at a longer range solution related to that. Now, I think
When I hit a pause button, I want it made real clear. Great man. Don't ever, I mean, you know, I hate that he's in this position, but, you know, I don't want anybody to think that we don't trust him. We had, I don't know, a 20-minute conversation, and I think we were both getting pretty excited about this, but if I all of a sudden find something that I can go after general government for, and I think I have a good position, and I want to huddle with my counsel and say, do I have solid ground? His obligation, any one of those commissioners could say, hey, are they trying to sue us? You know, and you told me you have to report to them.
Not entirely true.
Well, that was the scenario I used, but I just don't feel, I think there's services for your office, and that's what the CEO and I were talking about. But I think when it comes down, like at the airport, and I know we're a district over there, we have.
It's very different, right?
No, I respect that. We have an attorney, but we still utilize your office in cases for land and stuff like that. You still get involved.
the city of Gainesville still owns the land.
Right.
The operation of the airport authority is completely independent.
And that's what I'm saying. I do recognize it's different, but it really works well. But that's, I just don't want any of this, in my opinion, and I can't speak, we're not questioning you. And I know it's hard for you not to take the arrows because that's the way they're flying, and I apologize.
No, but, and I hope you believe me, I'm sincere when I don't feel the arrows.
Okay, good.
I don't, this isn't, I had a long conversation. I've had the same conversation with you. I've had it, probably about 20 times with Tony over the last 9 months. And I had a, 35, 40-minute conversation with Scott Walker, who I've known for years, earlier today. And in the spirit of this being a workshop, and frankly, echoing a little of what we heard in the public comment, I think it can't be said enough that an important thing this board, especially in these sort of nascent stage that you're in, to understand is what you are and what your role is. And this is an independent governing board of the city. Your decisions are completely independent, but your actions and your decisions are certainly integrated within a city. If you look at our current city charter, a charter that was created by special act of the legislature, that has been recently amended by special act of the legislature, that charter creates the city of Gainesville. It creates an elected city commission as the governing authority over generally now the municipal functions, traditional municipal functions, and it also now creates an appointed governing board of the utility system. And that the city commission is directed or is instructed or prohibited from directing or controlling any of the utility system functions. But the fact
Or
that-
interfering.
I think it uses the word directing or controlling, which I would argue is more significant even than interfering. But what remains undeniable when you read the charter, and that's always a bugaboo of mine for anyone that's been with me for the last 20 plus years with this city. I can't have a conversation with a governing board member without telling them, read the charter. It's short and it will inform you. The special act that just amended our charter is replete with references ensuring that the utility system and the GRU authority is part of the city. It is explicit. All property that has been owned, attributed to the utility system remains titled the name of the city. Any property acquired by this authority and its actions as a governing board of the city is titled the name of the city. If this authority were to be able to exercise the power of eminent domain to acquire property, that property will be titled the name of the city. Any debts or liabilities accrued associated with the utility side, the utility system, are debts and liabilities of the city. Any new debts that you issue are debts of the city. Employees of the utility system are employees of the city. And in fact, specifically when it deals with debt issuances, it is clear that the executives of the utility system, your CEO, GM, and your CFO are agents of the city. That's undeniable. We are now one entity. My client is the city of Gainesville with two governing boards. I think that's difficult for you. It is unusual, but unusual doesn't mean wrong and doesn't mean bad, obviously. But the same charter that creates both of these governing boards also creates the city attorney's office. And the role of the city attorney is succinct. It is, to be the legal advisor to an attorney for the city. The city attorney shall prosecute and defend all suits, complaints, and controversies for and on behalf of the city, unless otherwise directed by the commission, and shall review all contracts, bonds, and other instruments in writing in which the city is to be a party, and shall endorse on each approval as to form and legality. Now, what we're seeing here in these growing pains, and we're going to touch on more of them later, I suspect, tonight and later meetings, is in this transition period that we're experiencing, it is novel, it is unusual, and there are great unknowns. And while we can argue all day long that the authority provided to the authority, and it's confusing that the same language is used, is clear, that doesn't mean that our partners will believe that. When I say our partners, I mean the banks that we will use to issue debt, the bond counsel that we have, the bond holders ultimately, and even now we'll speak relatively soon at the next meeting, I suspect, about the trunk radio system. The county is concerned about potential questions about the effect of this new governing system. And there's going to be a desire on the part of these partners to have cooperation between the city commission and this authority in order to provide, if nothing else, belts and suspenders to our partners so they can move forward with assurance that there are no questions. But what remains is that the authority, as I said, is independent of the commission, but fully integrated with the city. And the role I'm in is to advise the city, including this authority. These large problems we talk about that we're going to be wending our way through, dealing with how do we assure banks and bondholders and bond counsel and the county when it comes to that transaction, that the city entirely stands by the transactions is a big enough problem, a problem we can and will get through. Without a legislative change, the problem is if you have a independent counsel that isn't provided for in our charter, I'm afraid you're just spreading that problem to every contract you get into. You're still going to need this office, not me, take me out of it again.
Well,
And again, and if it is a concern about, and again, it's all fair. If there is a concern about competence, about responsiveness, about resources, that's a conversation we have, and we make sure that you get the representation that you need. But that's a different conversation. The conversation we've been having here is one of trust and of conflict and of concern for mixed loyalties of some sort. And I can tell you one thing, my loyalties are to the city. Because when you talk about attorney-client privilege, when it comes to actions you may want to have.
Can I hit a pause button like I did with her?
Sure.
So you're talking about the city that recently sued us. That sued the
No,
board.
you didn't exist at that time.
I know, but they sued to have the board not
You didn't
exist.
exist at that time, and it was a clear consideration at the time after the order was entered in Tallahassee that within 5 days of that, this board is installed. The city was different at that point after that. There are two governing boards now. So it is not the same party in many ways. We were reconstituted by the legislature, and so that is a consideration going forward. And what we had before, I can say in all candor, at least from my perspective, is an effort to try to forestall a lot of these issues to get some sort of clarification as to how things move forward. Because as you can see, when you hear from bond counsel and when you're going to hear regarding these liquidity facilities, everything isn't as clear as we want it to be with this legislation, nor as clear as it will be. It'll be clarified through our actions, through responses to our actions, maybe even through further legislation. Our role now is to try to make sure we do take step by step going forward together. But again, when we talk about potential conflicts and attorney-client privilege, I think the one thing that you all will need to understand, and maybe it's not a workshop we need, but more of a retreat type thing, is to understand that my client is the city. You can serve as part of that party individually. This board can, an individual commissioner can, the commission as a whole. Ms. Rasnick will be, as a department head, will be an important client at times. They're all representative of the one client that I have that is the city. And I can assure you that in my obligations, in my duties to the city, there is no support from me or my office for an effort of another governing body to interfere with the utility system functions. But there is, I think, an obligation on my part to ensure that this board and that board both go forward, recognizing that while they're independent, their actions are integrated and will affect each other. These decisions that you're going to be making regarding the government services contribution, it will affect the general government bond rating, good or bad, either way. And I'm not saying the effect is warranted or not warranted. I don't get into the policy. That's another thing that will frustrate you. I don't participate in those conversations. But those are factors that are legitimate. You said at the very first meeting that we had, you recognize, I think it was, maybe it was Mr. Lawson, I think it was you, Chair, that you recognize yourself as a fiduciary of the utility system and a fiduciary of the city. And you nailed it on the head. And that's where I am as well.
I can guarantee I'll throw the red flag and say, I never said that.
Maybe it was Mr.
It
Lawson.
wouldn't have been me.
It was one of you.
And I respect where we're going. I think we might be going too far down the trail, but at the end of the day, what I am in my heart, and this is the conversation you and I had, we've been charged to run a business,
A public business.
but a business at that,
Yes.
okay? And to run a business, there's certain things I don't want people to know right off the bat. You answer, and we asked you in that first meeting, you answer to the 7 commissioners, not the 4 board members here. Ultimately, they're your bosses.
I distinctly, no, when I answered that question, what I told you is that I answered to a client. My client's the city. I was in private practice for 7 years before I came to government service, and I can tell you there were
We're not
occasions,
going to be taking comment at this point.
there were occasions when I had fees paid by a different entity than the client. The loyalty always goes to the client. And I assured you then, and I'll assure you now, that as a lawyer, my obligation is to my client. When this board is acting within the scope of its authority as provided by the charter,
Which, by the way, I do have right here, and I
That's
keep
the
it in my
city.
briefcase, sir.
it's been with me everywhere for
I
the
know,
last 7
but
months.
so, and again, we are on a time frame, and I'm sure other people want to. I guess as a business person, matter of fact, that was my corporate attorney back there. I just thought about it. Scott was my guy. So, and if he represented my competition, and Scott goes, well, you know, I got to talk to him too, that would be a problem. So if I'm having a business decision, and I'm not, Madam Mayor, manager, but I'm saying, say I had a problem with what she's doing and taking out too much money, and I'm like, I want to take action against her. Ultimately, the people that sign your checks and hire and fire you are the 7 city commissioners.
And I'm obliged to put my personal interests to subjugate it beneath that of my client. And whether you believe that or trust that,
Sir,
that's a trust I'll have to earn. But but it is the truth.
And I respect that.
And this is a conversation that I had at length today, with Scott. I've known him for
Yeah.
a very long time. And I said, hey, if you can read this differently from me and find some way that an independent counsel, that's a lot off my plate.
And fair enough, and maybe that's a conversation that Scott can have with the board at some point, because I don't want to screw up our 20-minute thing, and I saw Mr. Coates' hand go up, and I want to respect that. But at the end of the day, I trust you. I made that point to say, I trust you. I've known you for a long time. I know your wife. You're amazing people, okay? I don't ever want this to look, but at the end of the day, I need to know when I say something that is part of the business plan, that it's not going any further. And that's where I'm confused, and I'm going to have to come to grips with. Mr. Coates.
In researching this topic, there is a rule of law where a defendant plaintiff situation can in fact have the same representation, but it's actually very narrowed to family law. And what that gives is normally it's people who are socioeconomically depressed and can't afford multiple attorneys. But the piece that is extremely important for us all to understand is that in that situation, both parties have to consent. And it comes down to, I personally don't consent based off of previous dealings with Mr. Nee, and the fact that the city took our money to then sue us. And we also have Ms. Bianca over here, who the utility is actually paying her salary, and she's an attorney. So we need to understand the depth at which the legal fees are going out. Was anyone on the board aware that GRU actually pays her salary? Yeah, so we have a very competent utility attorney that is in the exact same situation as Mr. Nee, and we're paying her salary. We need to just understand that, and I cannot consent to using Mr. Nee for both. The fact that it's been brought up by everyone shows that there is in fact a conflict of interest. The mere labeling of it is a conflict of interest. So I cannot, no disrespect, Mr. Nee, I just can't work with you on this authority when it comes to the private business side of what we're trying to accomplish.
And I'm belaboring the point though, but there are no both parties. That's the really difficult thing for you to wrap your head around. There's one city and there's 2 governing boards. You're not in competition with each other. We need to get to a place where you're not in conflict. with
Right
each
now,
other.
I think we are.
Well,
To be clear, Mr. Nee, I fully understand, and I don't appreciate the simpling it down. I fully understand the situation, and I stick with what I say. You're a nice person. I appreciate it, but I wouldn't have you as my attorney.
and I respect that. But again, there are not different parties in the state of the current legislation. Will that change? Perhaps. And then, and if that changes, it may trigger a greater separation even, for good or ill. But the state of things as they are now, there's one city.
Can I ask one final question and then we can move on? Because I apologize, I feel. So in your legal opinion, is the board forbidden from reducing our transfer to the legal department and hiring an independent attorney?
I think you can make hires to serve as consultants or advisors. But when you're gonna need to have contracts reviewed and endorsed as required by the
You're in.
charter, it's
You're
gonna
in.
need to be our office.
Of course it is. We already had that discussion.
When you're gonna be doing debt issuances, it's going to have to be, because that's the name of the city. And bear in mind, if there is a GRU employee who is a city employee who's driving a bucket truck and it causes an accident and mows down,
Yep.
3 people in a crosswalk,
You're
that's a
it.
city liability.
You're it.
That's not a GRU. There is no difference between the employees and the liabilities.
No, the GM, the CEO and I had that conversation that there is a lot of aspects that the attorney will be there, but we also, but we could hire our independent counsel. We have the authority of this board to do that.
You hire a number of consultants with
Okay.
a variety of expertise.
Okay.
That's absolutely true. And I think that's fair.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to, and I do agree someday it'll be a much smoother path. I just think we got to get there.
So, Mr. Chair, just if I can have Mr. Nee clarify, what the conversations we've had is we can hire that counsel, that we're hiring them as an advisor. They can't represent us as our attorney. That has to be the city attorney's office according to the city charter. Is that
That's correct. They're not going to be signing pleadings, endorsing contracts. And I think you'll speak with them as to whether or not professionally they have an attorney-client relationship with you, such that what you want. But then also bear in mind, as he can explain as well as I would, the attorney-client privilege in a public business is not near what you're used to in a private business.
I do have the 3 years advantage of that.
Yeah.
So I've
And
been there.
It's extremely frustrating from my position
Yep.
as well, I can assure you.
Well, and I respect that, and I had a tough time with the biomass contract with that. Okay, so I'm sorry, that was me. Anybody else have any questions?
The only thing I would add to that, Chair, is that if we do go down this road, I would be looking for a cost offset.
Oh, yeah.
I don't really want to add cost as a part of this. So if it comes forward, it's like, here's how we're gonna.
Yeah, and obviously, we'd have to put it up for proposal too. There's a procurement process that we have to fill. So, but yes, definitely.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, thanks for that clarification, because that is the last piece. We do have to go through a procurement process to do that. That would be the recommendation that we would do. We would have to look at a cost offset, not just as added cost. But then ultimately, we would maintain a relationship with the city attorney's office as the attorney for the city of Gainesville and GRU. And so that is kind of where we're looking at moving forward. The other piece that I shared in terms of the future is if there is any legislative relief that could provide more clarity or more certainty going forward, that is worth exploring as well. All right. Are we good with that item?
I'm good.
All right. So I think the next item is Mr. Walters.
Follow that.
That's a tough one to follow, I swear. But we're going to talk about power next. So my name is Eric Walters, Chief Sustainability Officer for GRU, and wanted to really give you a brief overview of the Integrated Resource Plan, or the IRP, as you'll hear it called. And an IRP, it really develops strategy for energy needs. It looks at the needs of an electric system, peak demand, total demand for energy, and then it basically comes up with a way to meet that demand and optimize the cost. So it gives you the advantage of looking not only short-term, but also long-term. Sometimes you can get into decisions short-term that have a negative impact long-term and vice versa. So being able to look at them both together does provide a benefit, and that's really what the IRP does. So it is utility best practice. Most utilities will look at it as a strategic look in the future. GRU last completed our last IRP in 2019, And we've made the decision to repeat this process every 3 to 5 years. And so we are right within that time frame. Typically, when you do an IRP, you look at the first 3 to 5 years of action that it recommends, you go execute those, and then you reset and look at another 25 to 30 years in the future. It allows you to capture things that you've done and improvements you've made, but also allows you to capture new technology as it comes available and possibly implement that into your future plan as well. Next slide, please. So, current status. We started this process in January of 2023. That was a Scrivener's error there. And we have a team of experts that are helping us do this. So we have internal employees that are shepherding and managing this project. But we did something a little different this time. We hired Acuity Design Group, or ADG, and we have contracted them to help us engage with the community in this process. I personally have seen the interest of the community go up dramatically on where their power comes from, where it's sourced, and how it's done, and they have an extreme interest in that. And I would even go to say that this is becoming an industry standard or an industry norm at this point to do some community engagement. The last 3 to 4 IRPs that I've seen all had community engagements, and all the ones that I've seen that are either kicking off or in the process also have that component to it. What ADG does is really take a very complex technical process and help us break it down so that the community can engage with us and understand what we're doing and why, and provide valuable input into that. So far we've had 3 community groups, open community sessions, and then we have what we call a stakeholder advisory group, which is a group of representatives from different groups and organizations throughout the community to really go into a more detailed dive of what's going on and why we're doing it. We're also partnering with the Energy Authority. We are part owner of the Energy Authority. They are doing all the technical modeling for us. They are using a program called Plexos. And Plexos is really an energy production model, right? So it takes your peak demands, reliability concerns, and it comes up with an optimal generation mix. That generation mix is also reduced to the lowest life cycle cost available to meet that demand need. So every output and scenario that you will see will be cost optimized to reduce life cycle cost over that period. And it just depends on the different constraints that you put into place with that. So this time we'll be modeling 10 to 15 different scenarios and sensitivities. So when you look at a scenario or a sensitivity, you're trying to create a view of the future, right? What if, for instance, we have a high inflation future where inflation remains high for a very long period of time? Does that change our resource mix? What does that do for us? We will be looking at a number of things, including our baseline, which is basically the best forecast of what we think the future will be based on future fuel cost, cost to buy power, capital expenditures, variable O&M, fixed O&M, all of those things. Financial aspects, what is inflation going to be? At what rate can we borrow money? We'll take that baseline look, and that baseline look will be compared to all the other scenarios. All the other scenarios will be compared to that one. So what we get is basically a cross-section of options to meet our energy needs. We are currently reviewing preliminary results right now, and so those are starting to come out. Next slide, please. So future direction. We're looking to complete all of the modeling results by December of this year. And we'll be bringing back to the authority in January the preliminary results to discuss with this board. And so we expect that, I believe it's on the calendar for the 17th of January right now, to bring those preliminary results back to give you more detailed view of what those are, and to also provide opportunity for discussion and feedback as well. So after that, what we will start doing is creating a recommended path forward from the results. Okay, so I wanna address kind of a misconception with this. I get the question a lot, well, which scenario output are you gonna choose to be your resource path? And that's not really how we do it. You look at all the outcomes of those and you look for commonalities amongst those outcomes. So for instance, if we do 10 model runs and technology A shows up in 9 of them, what that shows me is that, well, that technology is gonna be flexible for us. No matter what the future looks like, it'll probably be a good decision to have that in our resource mix. On the other hand, if something doesn't show up, or it shows up in only one of the scenarios, that's probably a very limited solution, and we'll probably won't include that in the resource mix. So the way we're looking at it is looking for commonalities amongst that, and then also putting together a resource mix that ultimately is robust, is flexible, and reliable, and cost-effective. So that is the ultimate goal of the IRP. Once we go through that process, the recommendations, we'll bring that recommended plan back to this board, and I believe that's scheduled for April 17th of next year. So spring of '24, we'll be bringing those recommendations back to you, what we should do and how we should move forward. And with that, I will take any questions, discussion.
Go ahead. It's my understanding, or is it true that in the past plan that was adopted had to do, the decisions were made around a target date for carbon neutrality, and that resulted in significant cost to the utility or the lack of future investment in certain generation? Could you speak to that just to help me understand a little bit better? And then how are you thinking about that with this next plan?
Great question. So the previous IRP that we did was run in a very the same way. The renewable resolution, we started this process and that process in 2018. We went through a normalized process, and then the resolution came along towards the end of that. So what we did was we went back and ran additional scenarios to capture that goal and see the cost impact of that goal, which we did. And so, again, we looked for commonalities and outcomes. So across all of the total, I believe, 15 scenarios that we ran, there were a couple of things that were common amongst all of those. And we went and did those because it made sense no matter what the future looked like, right? So the short answer is no, we didn't go out and initiate things that were just from that resolution or the result of that. But we did go out and look for commonalities amongst those. One of the things that came out of that was, and you'll hear this discussion, is about solar and the solar contract that we just signed. Well, because of the cost effectiveness of solar, it was recommended in all 15 scenarios as a reducer in cost. And so that is why the main driver, we went out and did that. Another was the upgrade of the Kelly plant across the street, which was also done. And those are really the two main things, or only things that we did from that previous IRP. And so at this point, we're taking another look with the solar contract in play, with the upgrades and the efficiencies that we gained from implementing that at Kelly. And now we're resetting the future and looking at it again. And I'll just say, again, addressing misconceptions, is that when we look at solar and we look at all of the other IRPs that we've seen, there's a commonality amongst all of them. There's solar and there's traditional natural gas generation as a mix. So what that tells us is that, hey, solar is part of the future. It's not the answer, but it is a part of it. And so when we go to look at the outcomes of our common facilities or common recommendations, we're seeing some of the same things. So that'll be obviously part of the discussion as we move forward with this.
Thank you.
So to solar, I love solar, by the way. I can't afford it, but I love it. So right now, with battery technology being what it is today, if I have 100 megawatts of solar, I need to have at least 100 megawatts of fuel, fossil fuel generation ready in case that goes down because of sun and everything else.
So not necessarily. Again, I feel like saying it's complicated, right? So when we looked at this first 75 megawatts of solar, we did what we call was an ACE study. ACE is area control error. It is the difference between the load that you have and the generation that you have to meet that load. That difference should be zero. If your ACE is zero, your system is balanced. When you look at an ACE study, you do kind of a stress test on that. You keep adding solar and you keep stressing the system until you can no longer maintain control of the system. And that's kind of your barrier, right? When we completed that ACE study previous to the last IRP, it showed us we could add up to about 80 megawatts of solar before we had an impact, okay? So with this first tranche, there is no impact to ACE, at least, from our system. With that, we also, because it has batteries along with it, it controls the ramp rate. It slows it down, which is the main driver for that loss of control in an electric system. It's
That's the
quick
12
changes.
megawatts of battery backup.
Correct. So short answer is yes. This first one, it does not require any additional firming capacity. I call it firming power. When we did the IRP going forward, we took account for that and said, okay, going forward, for every 2 megawatts of solar that you put in, you have to put in 1 megawatt of firming capacity. That can either be a fast start gas turbine or battery technology, something that can replace solar if it goes away or help mitigate the impacts. And so when we look at this IRP going forward, that is a factor, that is a constraint that was put in, and that was a cost that's also factored in. This first contract, that wasn't the case because our study showed it wasn't necessary, up to 80 megawatts.
So, but it would prevent me, you know, and I have it in front of me, let me grab Deer Haven too. You know, I still have to have that capacity, so my fixed cost for that is still there. So as a business person, I need to calculate my fixed cost for that 75 megawatts of backup fossil fuel into my solar. You know what I'm saying is, we're saying it's $40.53 a megawatt hour. That's great, but I still have to have, we just happen to have the backup ability. We have the peakers, we have Deer Haven 2, we have plenty of power. But as a business person, you know, I mean, I'm not picking on him. Okay, he owns a hospital and there's a syringe and people go, why did the syringe cost me $15? I can get it on Amazon for $8. Well, there's a cost associated with that syringe. We don't really attribute costs associated to solar as we should. And I know it's just fuel and that's the way we talk about it. But as a business person, I need to know my all-in costs when I'm making a decision. And that's like the other day when we were talking about the trunk radio. Let's tell the whole story so nobody's pointing at us. And so that's, I just want to, so if I wanted 250 megawatts of solar tomorrow, we're a no-go without adding some fossil generation.
Correct.
Okay.
So
So would we figure that cost of fossil generation into the solar?
when necessary, yes. So this first tranche didn't require us to add any additional.
I do agree, yeah.
Additional generation.
That's why I use the number 100 megawatt.
Right.
by the way.
So when we go forward, we will capture all that cost. All that cost of firming that solar is actually captured in the IRP in every scenario. And so it accounts for all of the firming power that's needed. All of the fixed O&M, all the variable O&M, all of the fuel cost, all the capital expenditures required to meet that resource plan is all captured.
And the only
So
thing I
it-
ask you, it's presented to the board as such, because when I was on the city commission, when it was presented, all that cost, the costs weren't really in there. The monetary costs and everything weren't in there. I had to dig to find them. So as business people, we need to know all the costs when we're doing something. That's all I'm saying.
Absolutely, and we'll make a commitment to do that. And we have to know that there's apples and oranges and pears when you do these things, right? I don't carry the same fixed cost for solar that I do for a traditional generating plant. It just doesn't happen. You have some oversight that's there to help maintain an oversight and dispatch that, but the cost structure is completely different. And so once you start cross-pollinating a lot of those things, then you do get away from a true cost analysis of what's there.
But there is attributing costs to the solar if we have to go into fossil fuel backup generation.
Correct, that is accounted for.
Right.
It's all there.
Okay. That's all I'm asking.
Okay.
Because I personally would have hit a pause button on the solar contract, just because I don't think we needed it yet, but I'm being told different, so we'll see.
Well, just out of curiosity, how much power is our solar produced in the last 2 or 3 days?
So we don't have any utility scale solar at this time. There's rooftop solar and there's the feed-in tariff solar. I don't know if we have that, what that would be.
No, the rooftop and the feed-in are the feed-in, we understand how much has been made, but the rooftop is kind of netted in with our load. And speaking to that point, that is another reliability concern that's baked into the IRP as well. So for instance, on days like today, yeah, there's none, right? So what we do in the model to account for that is a percentage that's contributed to load or to peak demand. So we take, just to make the math easier, when we do our load forecast and our peak load during the day, we try to account for how much of the solar will be available for that, right? So if you take 100 megawatts, only about 36 megawatts will be available on the average day to meet peak load. You also look at a winter loading. The peak load for winter, and when I say winter, it's relative, it's Florida, right? But let's say you've had 2 days of overnight lows in the 20s. I'm going to hit my peak winter load probably the second or third night of that, right? Well, when I look at contribution to load from solar, my peak happens just before sunrise. So what is the contribution to that? None. The model accounts for that. So effectively, what it does, it makes sure that our system is reliable even when there is zero solar available, right? When you add all of that cost in, we've run costs with no solar, we've run costs with no solar and batteries. And again, solar is a piece of the answer. It is not the whole answer.
Anybody?
Okay. That's it. All right. So let's move on to net metering. One of the things that we wanted to give you a kind of a background on net metering and some of the things that we're doing to move forward to address it. So net metering really came about from PURPA. So it is the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act of 1978. And it effectively made sure that if an independent power producer wanted to connect to the electric system, the people that own the system gave them a space to do that, right? And made sure that they were paid the proper rate. It was basically open access. You wanted to make sure everyone could provide power to the system. So as a result of that, most utilities pay full rate, including GRU, for that power, a full retail rate. But what the issue was is that the current scale of customer-sided generation was never foreseen as we've seen it now. Okay, it was really built for independent power producers. But when you look at net metering, because it's escalated so much recently, now you're starting to see where you have customers subsidizing other customers, right? And that's something that we typically try to move away from. Any proposed changes to the policy have been met with resistance, obviously, because you're getting paid a higher rate and you're proposing paying people less. People usually take offense to that. Next slide. So IRUs are required by law to compensate at the full retail rate. FPL actually filed a bill a couple of years ago to have that changed, but that law was vetoed by the governor in 2022. However, because we're a municipal utility, we have some flexibility here and some latitude on what we pay for net metering customers. The number of customer-sided PV applications has exploded, and when I say that, we have roughly about 1,400 net metering customers today. About 425 of those were signed up over the last year. Okay, so it's the incline is dramatic. It's exponential, right? And as a result of that, you have non-solar owners that are now subsidizing solar owners. So we're looking to evaluate that. Going to the future, next slide, please, I'm sorry. Going to the future, most utilities pay full rate, but not all of them. JEA has actually made a switch. They go to a fuel rate they pay. The city of Lakeland has also made a switch, and they require a demand rate to do that. So they're looking for ways to kind of either recoup that cost or stop some of the cross-subsidization, right? What we're proposing to do is really investigate options that look at that and address that problem specifically. We want to minimize the subsidization. It could include a number of different things: a new rate structure that's associated with that, payment rate, or fixed fees for new net metering customers.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
And I'm going to give you the scenario, so hopefully it'll work. I hit my mark. I know what I use in power. I have the solar panels, and matter of fact, I'm 20% over my usage. And everything's working beautiful. The life's great. I should anticipate an electric bill of about $16.80 a month.
So if you have if it offsets fully,
Yes.
then yes.
So I just cheated the city out of their taxes, and I'm using the transmission back and forth that we're paying for, and the poor people that we're trying to help are actually subsidizing the people that can afford the big solar panel. And we're worried about who? I'm just one vote here, but you bring me every option you can to recoup my money for the people in the city, serious. I mean, that's what's amazing to me. And then they tell people to turn down your thermostats if you got a problem. Okay, we have people out there working their butts off, and I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at the system. I hated it when I was on the city commission. You know, and if you can afford solar, God bless you. Thank you so much. But don't tell people to turn down the thermostats and pay a fair share for transmission. We got to look at what we can recoup. Transmission, battery storage, whatever we call it, it's not right that people that are out there busting their rear ends are subsidizing people who can afford solar.
And that's
There's
really
my speech, James.
And that's what we're really looking to do is review all options, look at what's out there to right size that cost and stop that subsidization. We want to make
Which
sure
could
that
actually lower rates.
we're actually trying to make sure that we're closer to the cost, right? So what we're looking at is in the future, in the next few months, there's been a proposal to bring a few options back to discuss at the beginning of March in your regular meeting, 3/6. And then also bring back some proposed rates, structures, programs, fees, whatever it is by May 1st to be able to take action on. Okay,
I think that's the last item.
I think
Is
so.
that correct?
Mr. Chair, there is one more item left.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Which is, I believe, right? We have your, well, the final thoughts, rather, I should say,
Okay,
for you. Yeah.
so what I'm proposing to do at this time is us take a break until about 7 o'clock, maybe a few minutes after 7 o'clock. And what we're gonna try to do is synthesize the information that we heard, adjust our work plan for the year regarding that, bring that back so that you all can discuss that as holistically, make sure we're capturing the priorities and the things that you all had discussed today, and then really just kind of have that final discussion. So if we can take a break.
Yep.
And then we'll come back up, let's say 5 after 7.
Sounds great.
We can come back.
Everybody's gonna run to the same So I just, and I told them, I said, I don't care what you know about power. Can you manage good people? Because we have good people. And I said, you know, because all the people I'm interviewing, they're telling me all this. I said, well, that doesn't, I got people that can run that. You know, it's good people. You remember my brother-in-law Kenny, right? Kenny Powell. So he was number 2 or something in your imaging.
That's right, yep.
So he went down for HCA and ran a whole outpatient. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was frustrated because the management won't ever come and talk to me. I said, that's a compliment. That's the way I left it, but the board changes their mind. Oh, yeah, you know something, and you're right. I don't even, so, yeah, thank you. Didn't even think about it. But, so nobody would come and talk to them and this and that, and it's frustrated. And they said, what can we do to keep you? I said, you know, I think the ship went too far. And it's a shame, but he didn't understand.
How was he? He is. I'm sure you are too. I mean,
Yeah, well, they say that.
I joke with him.
It's a shame. So now
He really
he's
is a gentleman, man. Yeah, my dad was 20 years in the Navy. He never had a hat or anything like that.
okay. Oh, yeah, I'm just talking about my brother-in-law.
Of his cars, he's got the coffee table book. I mean,
Oh, I don't care. No, so my brother-in-law used to work at the
I
hospital.
love my
And so that's, we were just reminiscing. No board meeting.
maid.
Okay,
In the front of it, 2 chairs.
see, the attorney is disturbing us.
No, I don't blame them.
Okay, we're back in action here. So, CEO,
Yes, Mr. Chair. So what we attempted to do was to try to synthesize the information we heard today. I'm going to go through a couple of slides, and really what I think we want to do is if the slide doesn't capture the information that you want to see back from us, then let's capture that information and we can include that. Now, keep in mind, the slides for each topic aren't comprehensive in everything that we will present back to the board, but it was just making sure we capture specific things from you all as the members. So if we can go to the slides. Okay, so the first one was on the GSC. So the big notes that we heard were about comparing the GSC to other utilities, looking at can the GSC overpayment be recovered? Is the GSC to true up or claw back, like looking back and evaluate that? And then the legal repercussions of ending the GSC or anything with changes that we make. And so those are things that we'll add to, and after the end of these couple of slides, we're going to come back to that original calendar and show where we're going to be addressing each of those topics. So that'll be in a special meeting or regular meeting coming up very, very soon. All right, so let me pause. So is there anything we missed there? Just jump in if we want to have anything in addition to that. And again, we're going to provide a broader context in the in-depth meeting, but these are the specific ones you.
yeah, I mean, you said, and this would be, okay, that's the government service contract, okay.
So that's the GFT piece of it.
Anything from everybody? No?
I mean, only thing I would say is just how that connects to our debt reduction plan and how that would flow through and the impact it would have.
Yep.
Just connecting those dots.
Okay, absolutely. And so go to the next slide. It might be captured on the next slide, but if not, we will make sure. So on the net debt reduction plan, it is to explore options to increase those reductions. So we have a plan that's in place that we're implementing, but can we accelerate it? Can we increase reductions? Can we increase the paying down of the debt? Include the customer rate impact. So if we're able to do that, how does that benefit the customer? Examine interest payment principal ratio. So we talked about levelizing the principal payments instead of backloading them. And so we can address that. And then rebalancing the debt with City of Gainesville. So a topic was brought up that you said that has to do with, if we'd made overpayments, should that be something that general government kind of picks up? So that'll be the last piece as well. And again, this will be, I'll show it when we get to the calendar at the end, but it'll be in a special meeting or a regular meeting coming up that we have on the calendar. So I'm going to keep going unless you all want to jump in if we're missing anything. So next slide. So on the utility rates, I think the big question was regarding the cost of service and particularly any undercharging or overcharging in the different classes. And then also looking at the tiers, I think we brought that up as well, as where the tier cutoffs are, whether we need tiers. We can bring all of that back, and then bringing those back to the board for review. We'll probably try to line that up with us completing the cost of service, the current cost of service. So we have the latest and greatest cost of service study and bringing that back at that time. I think it's in February, but
That's the
we'll
Baker
see.
Tilly study?
Correct.
typically?
Yep. And so that's a regular meeting, I think in February, but again, we'll look at the calendar at the end. Okay, next slide. So independent legal counsel, so there was emphasizing cost offset if we're moving in that direction, confirming the role of the city attorney. And so, I think understanding which items the city attorney would be focused on and where we would utilize a different legal advisor, looking at going through an RFP process to do that, and then the consideration of legislative action to clarify or modify. So that was the feedback. Again, I'll show on the calendar, the workshop or special meeting where we'll cover that. So if we can go to the next one. So the IRP, make sure that we're providing the itemized cost, capital O&M and fuel for each scenario, and particularly ensure that all costs are considered in the alternatives. The chair, your point about making sure that 2-to-1 ratio on firm power to solar, that we're considering those costs as part of that and demonstrating that as we show the results. And so we'll make sure as we do that.
Is there a rate consideration in that?
Does it get to rates?
I just didn't know, and just sort of looking at it, at the end of the day, like I told you, we have great service, we got to work on rates. So I want to know if there's a rate consideration associated with that. Obviously, the cheaper the product, theoretically should be the cheaper the rate, but.
So Chair, the short answer is no, the IRP doesn't consider it within the modeling itself, but we do want to work with our budget finance folks and see a rate impact with the costs that come out of it.
Okay.
And then if you go to the last, all right, maybe one more and then the last slide. So net metering, so present every option for recovering costs, address the subsidization issue that we were having a discussion about in what we proposed there. So we'll make sure we do that as we bring those items forward. And if you can go to the last slide. So on the back of the packet that you have is the same thing that is on the screen right now. This is taking that calendar we shared at the beginning. It's adding a few things in red that we had either discussion here today about and putting those in meetings. What it also is doing is all of the yellow meetings would be added. Those are additional meetings from what is on our current calendar of the first Wednesday of every month. So to get through all of these items, we would be proposing adding all of those meetings in yellow. And we would have to get approval. So when we add those special meetings, that's an action by the board. So for instance, for the special meeting on the 13th coming up, we'll have to make sure the board takes action on the 6th to add that meeting to the calendar, and we'll have to do that with the rest of those. But this is really all of the discussion we had today and the priorities of where all of those fit is the calendar you're seeing here. So if there's something that needs to be accelerated or delayed or moved around in a different place, I think this is the time to do that so that we can get the information together, get it to you all as members in order for you to make good, wise decisions going forward. So it's open to you all for discussion.
Clear on that?
So I know this is to member coach's comment in the first meeting. There's a lot more meetings than we had originally thought of. So it's a lot more of a commitment to do that, but I really think this is what we're going to need to deliver to you in order for us to, go through a business transformation of GRU.
And just to that point, we're not going to take action tonight, but I think we need to have that discussion December 6th about adding regular meetings, not workshops, wanted this to be as casual as possible so we could have some frank conversation. We could also do that in meetings. We can, have conversation. But I do believe we're gonna have to have some more meetings, and that'll get the public up to speed. They'll be ready to rock and roll when we have the meetings. So let's, on December 6th, be prepared to, let's get that on the agenda.
And that's about adding the special meeting.
Well, I think just regular.
For this calendar.
Yeah, just keep going, yes. That it for you?
That is all that we had, and kind of wanted to get the feedback from you all, but again, this is a time for you all.
Right.
To interact with one another, ask questions of us, or provide.
Well, that'd be in our
additional
member comment. I think that would be a chance to talk back and forth, so. The floor.
I would like to request if we can continue this layout. I love watching people when they talk. It allows me to understand from a different perspective.
I agree.
Hence why the other 2 weeks ago, I wanted to go over there and talk. But this would be really nice so we can see each other, if you guys are okay with that.
I think it's a great layout, and I agree with you. I'd love to, because if not, we're doing this half the time and
Yeah.
blocking, and so I think it works out. We can address we have to make sure that we have good microphones for the public, that there's cameras, let's think of the whole picture, how we're gonna do some projection or something, so I love it. I think staff can handle it, right? Good. Anything else, Mr. Coates?
Adding items to the agenda. So I'd like to put the first, for December 6th meeting, the first topic that we talk about, so we can just get it off the table, is Mr. Cunningham's contracted employment.
Okay.
I just want to push through that, and that way we can get on to business.
So we currently have it shown on the 13th, but we can move it to the 6th.
I would say the 6th would be better, just, for everybody, quite frankly. I think the sooner the better, and I just scratched that off my member comment.
Thanks.
Sir, anything? Okay, so let's see, I did that, we did that. That's it. I don't have anything else. Again, thank you for your patience. This is probably not normal, as it was pointed out, but I think it's a conversation that needed to happen and in a casual environment. I like some of the things that we've talked about. One ask we all hear, so we can find out where we're fishing and why we're fishing there, and it'll make us a better board. We've been getting some emails from you folks. If we find out that like every member is being emailed, you might not see us all email you back or something. We'll try when we can, or point it in the direction to get you the answer. 90% of the times we don't have the answer, we might forward it. So as we learn, right now it's going to the CEO. And I've asked personally that his assistants monitor my emails. So if they see something, they could respond faster. So if you get a response, it's not that I'm blowing you off. I'm giving you the best answer I can. And that's for me. Anybody else want to address your emails, or?
I've already talked to Mr. Cunningham, because I'm just forwarding them
Okay.
to him, because I don't want to misrepresent or anything.
Yeah, so. Pardon me? Not right, we're not taking comment right now. Sorry. I mean, if it's something I can talk to you about later, but not right now in the public.
Could I just say that I wish you would look and address having your emails published like they do with the county, like they used to do, and got us.
That was a question we had in the beginning. So like I said, we are trying to, Ms. Beatty, we're trying to do all that stuff. And as it's been pointed out, we are a new up and running and new locations. We're trying to get up to speed as fast as possible. So that's it. We're adjourned.
So, no front page of Gainesville Sun?
Oh, no. Someone will get there.
No front page of the Gainesville Sun.